Thank you, John. Well, I'm not here as a mathematician, so the idea here is to present to you this very broad project of research about South African higher education, which I am an international advisor, and my function there was to have some role as comparing South Africa and Brazil's systems, and we chose to look at engineering education. And as you can see here, so before that, so I put a slide here that many people may use this, so I'll do it first. This is probably the most quoted part of Clark Kerr's book, The Uses of the University. And he starts saying, this is a historical claim, like about 85 institutions in the world in 1500 still exist in recognizable forms with similar functions and broken histories. Then the Catholic Church, Parliament, Swiss cantons, and 70 universities. And then he goes on to say, kings that rule, feudal lords with vassals, and guilds with monopolies are all gone. These 70 universities, however, are still in the same location with the same, some of the same buildings. And then he says, with professors and students doing much the same things, and with governance carried on in much the same ways. Well, pretty strong statement. And I think most people here would dispute some of this. The historians, sociologists, people that work in student life, student experience, in academic careers, public policy, management, government, and so on. So anyway, maybe we can see this as some sort of guide that the next 50, 60 years of research in higher education will try to either confirm or criticize and develop. So I think this is some people may dispute this, but it puts some of in very short ways almost anything that we can talk about the higher education since then. And I think this is a great accomplishment by Clark Kerr. So the pathways for graduates in South Africa is one strand in a much larger project in South African higher education, which is this long title, Pathways to Personal and Public Good, Understanding Access to Student Experience of and Outcomes from South African Undergraduate Higher Education. Access to student experiences of. So this is coordinated by Simon Marginson, all of you probably know him, Paul Ashton from Lancaster, and Jenny Case from UCT, now at Virginia Tech. And this strand was coordinated by Jenny Case, Delia Marshall from West Cape, and Tristan McCollum from the UCL. Okay, and so the larger project has these basic questions. In what ways does access to undergraduate education have a transformative impact on people and societies? What conditions are required for this impact to occur? What are the pathways from an undergraduate education to the public good, including inclusive economic development? And the three strands are access, classical theme, student experience, another classical theme, and postgraduate pathways for people coming from out of the system. And I think what's missing here in general, we don't have any issues of academic profession. We don't have anything about government and governance. So anyway, but we, or in general, some political aspects of higher education. But anyway, and maybe it's not so closely related to the topic here, but I'll try to show that maybe it is pretty close to what the subject today is of this conference. So one aspect is this is a multi-campus, multinational endeavor. So we have all these South African institutions, then those UK institutions, and then a couple of institutions from Mozambique and other from Kenya, Brazil, Finland, and the United States. So there are people, these are like 18, 17 institutions, 7 countries, but there are more like 30 people involved. So this is one aspect I think is related to today's theme of this conference, is that in spite of all the nationalism and issues that are today involved in many countries, still research in higher education or in all areas involving universities still is pretty much going on and contribute to diminish, to reduce the tensions that come from other areas of activities like politics mainly. So the graduate pathways trend, the last one, there are 4 main questions. What are the destinations of graduates? Employment, further studies, broader life, trajectories, and how they have changed recently. In what ways do graduate employment trajectories depend on social background, institution, discipline, national context? How do graduates themselves perceive, interpret, and evaluate these trajectories? In what ways are graduates' broader life trajectories influenced by their experience of higher education? So you see, this is much concerned with the several ways of looking at student experience. And in this paper, then we go into Brazil and South Africa in engineering. So then we have some basic questions about papers. How have South Africa, the automatic correction for Portuguese AS in South Africa, and Brazil dealt with issues regarding education of engineers in the last 2 decades? In what ways does access to undergraduate education have a transformative impact on people and society? So it's related to the general questions. What conditions required for this impact? No, this is wrong, right? This is the same thing as before. So just, so everything related to engineering, that's correct. So in the case of South Africa, higher education is recognized as having a distinctive and crucial role in building post-apartheid society, and is a key driver for equity, social justice, and democracy in the state's vision for 2030. And so these are much related to aspects of Brazilian policy as well for higher education. So let me put here a couple of slides with some figures that related to interesting aspects. So these are the percentage for OECD countries, Brazil, South Africa, UK, and US, of people in the ages 25 to 34. So mostly people that recent graduates are expected to be there, that are employed, okay, by level of education. So you can see that if people are typically tertiary education increases your chance in all countries, in all to be employed. There are some differences, but in general the picture is very similar for all, even emerging or developed economies. And the complement group is not exactly complement, but there are still people that are only studying, but people that are inactive, they called now the NEET, not employed or in education or training. So this is one of the targets of the new program of the United Nations for Sustainable Development to reduce the number of people that are not involved or in the education or employed and so on. And so you see that there are some differences, but again, you get somewhat reverse complementary picture from above. And there are some differences between Brazil and South Africa. Brazil is doing, it seems, a better job. And the UK and the US there's some difference there. And then you have the OECD averages. So these 2 pictures are interesting that they don't tell much of a difference we know these countries are very different. So maybe the US and the UK are similar, but even within the OECD, there is a large range of possibilities. So here's a picture that shows some differences. Is the degrees, undergraduate degrees by area. And then we can see, let me see this. This is the picture here. So you see, this is engineering, manufacturing, and construction. They all, in the OECD, is about 14% of all graduates are in this area, large area. In South Africa is 9%, in Brazil is 10%. But there is a big difference between Brazil and South Africa, is that in Brazil, most of the people here are in strict engineering degrees. It would be in England, the chartered engineers. In the case of South Africa, it's mostly the technical engineers. So this is reversed, and the paper will deal with this. So we are still working on the project. So these are some of the differences, and there are some differences as well. You see that large areas here, business, administration, and law, education, they're all large. But you see the OECD countries have a better spread of by the different large subject areas of education and undergraduate degrees. Okay, so let me stop here a little bit just to say that at this point we are detailing the issues of employment, how they, and then we are trying to look, when information is not so easy to get, about ethnic distribution, which is very important for both Brazil and South Africa, the social inclusion aspects, gender. So there's a big difference in gender distribution among these areas. And also how they related to recent public policy. So both countries have governments that have stated and have tried to develop some policies. In the case of Brazil, of funding large private institutions through loans to students, which has become something of an economic problem for Brazil recently. So there are contrasting aspects. So now I want to go back here to the larger theme of the conference, maybe to make a few comments. Everybody knows this guy, right? Steve Curry. And there is the Donald Trump that said, no, you don't want, I think there was some, I remember reading something about some comments by Curry and the players, and then Trump in his very specific way said, okay, you don't have to come here. So this is Stephen Curry, right? But there's another Stephen Curry, who's this guy on the right there, who's a microbiologist from Imperial College, very important scientist in the area. But he also has this public, he writes in this, sometimes in the Oakham corner in The Guardian. And this is a very recent paper where he says, universities are part of the solution to dysfunctional Brexit debates. And then he showed me, I met him last week, and he pointed me to these two things here. And there was a mention here, personally never thought of academics as experts, no experience of the real world. Okay, so this anti-intellectual mood that surrounded the Brexit debate. His idea with this paper, he has written more about this, but his idea is that scholars and people at university should be more outspoken regarding all in the specific terms of Brexit, but he also talks about nationalism in general. Then, the other person I want to mention here is Simon Marginson, who is part of our project, as one of the leaders actually. He has written Universities, the Collateral Damage of Blood and Soil Nationalist Politics. This was in the World Times Higher Education. And here is in Academic Matters in Canada, Global Higher Education, Social Solidarity, and the New Nationalism, so pretty much within the tops here. He says here, higher education serves both national and global interests in the pursuit of knowledge and student learning. Given populism's nationalist roots, there is mounting pressure to redefine the university's mission. How should universities respond? And then he puts this list. Okay, so it is my almost last slide. And in general, he will talk about things that the university always thought they were doing. And he also calls to stronger ties to local and regional communities, which sometimes some universities are not so worried about. But I'd like to finish with the comment by another person from Berkeley who just died last month, right? Previous director here at the center, Smelser, is that correct? Yeah. He lists the missions, functions of university, then he says this: as a result of these difficulties in describing abstract functions of university, I'm going to view the functions of higher education more concretely and historically, namely as a sequence of compacts between agencies outside those institutions. And he lists all the stakeholders that we talk about. And I think this is also related to John's work about the social contracts of the University of California to the state and the people living here. And I think this idea of social contract maybe is a way out in analyzing and developing better relations to the public, to regional stakeholders, and further. Thank you.
Thank you.